Today we're talking about solving quadratics with the use of imaginary numbers. A quadratic. Anybody know what a quadratic is? Yeah, when you're using the quadratic formula, what is in the equation? Okay, that's the quadratic equation. Quadratics have to deal when you have very good. They have to do when you have your x squared terms, when you have your 3 terms, x squared, an x term, a number term, or at least just the x squared term, right? Okay. All right. So remember, when you're solving quadratic equations, you want to get the square by itself. Then we take the square root of both sides. And then remember that anytime you have a negative under the root, it ends up becoming a I. Okay. So we want to solve each of these equations. On example 1, is your square by itself? So what do? You don't square them, you take the square root of both sides. Okay, so the square root of x squared is, and what happens when you have a negative? Bring it out, it becomes I root 50, and then can 50 break down? To what? Okay, either way, you get the same answer. So you have a pair of 5s with a... What do you guys remember about whenever we take the square root of both sides, your answer is going to be plus or minus. So my answer is x equals... Good. X equals plus or minus 5I root 2 is correct. Questions so far? All right, example 2. Is my square by itself? Good. And so we add 8 to both sides. What happens when you have a negative and a positive number? You subtract and take the sign of the bigger number. So what do we end up getting? Negative 28. Okay. Now is the square by itself? Yes, so then we square root both sides. We get z equals, we take the negative out, and it becomes I root 28. Good. And then can 28 break down? 7 and 4, and then 4 is? So what do I end up with? Perfect. Okay, example 3. You guys think you can handle that on your own? I think that's a great idea. You forgot something, Dylan. You forgot something. It would just go behind the 5. Good. I can't see it. Okay, the correct answer is plus or minus 5I. All right, so what's the first thing you did on this? Good, subtract 15. Anytime we have the same sign, we add and keep the sign. So that will make it a negative 50. Is the square by itself? No. So next you divide it by 2. So now you have x squared equals negative 25. Is the square by itself now? Yes. So we take the square root of both sides. So we get x equals, we bring the negative out, so we get I root 25. 25 is 5 and 5, so my answer is x equals plus or minus 5i. Beautiful. Okay, example 4. Did you guys already do that on your own? Okay, could I get a volunteer to come up and do this problem? Flessy, come on up.
You're gonna see my beautiful hands. Oh, it was already open.
Okay, so the first thing she's doing is subtracting 13 to both sides so that she can get the square by itself. So she gets 3x squared equals, and when there's two negative numbers, she is adding them and it stays negative. So she got negative 36. Next, to get the square by itself, she's dividing both sides by 3. So she gets x squared equals negative 12. Now that the square is by itself, she's taking the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared is x. She is breaking 12 down, so 12 is, she ends up with a pair of 2's and a 3 left over. She's also going to take that negative out and make it an I, so she gets 2I root 3. And then she remembers that anytime she takes the square root of something, the answer is plus or minus. Perfect. Good job, Leslie. Thank you. All right. Any questions here? No? We're good? Okay. Let's move on to 5.3 worksheet 3. So on this one, we're doing the same thing, but we have more than just an x squared. So if you notice here, do you see how the square is by itself? This whole thing is being squared. Do we see this? Yes? Okay, so what do I do at this point? No. No, we already have the square by itself. What do we do? Take the square root of both sides. Okay, so when I do that, I get x squared plus 4x minus 4 equals, and what's the square root of 64? 8. Wrong. Plus or minus 8. Thank you. Plus or minus 8 is the correct answer. Okay, so tell me what I'm going to do now. Thank you. Mia is correct. We are going to make two equations. Okay, so we have our x squared plus 4x minus 4 equals 8. And x squared plus 4x minus 4 equals negative 8. Now, what am I going to do now? Can I get just the square by itself? No, because we also have an x term, don't we? So the only way to solve this is to make it equal to 0 and then factor. So what am I going to do in order to make this equal to 0? Move the 8. So on this first one, I'm subtracting 8. I have x squared plus 4x, and negative 4 and negative 8 make negative 12 equals 0. Okay, so what multiplies to be negative 12 and adds to be 4? Good. X plus 6 and x minus 2. And when you set those equal to 0, what does x equal? Good. Positive 2 and a negative 6. Okay, so then we go to the other side here, and what will I do? Very good, add 8. Anytime we have a negative and a positive, we subtract, take the sign of the bigger number, and that makes, very good, positive 4. So what multiplies to be 4 and adds to be 4? X plus 2 and x plus 2. And when we set those equal to 0, what does x equal? Just negative 2. So then when you write your answer, we can write that as x equals plus or minus 2 and negative 6, because we have a positive 2, negative 2, negative 6. Okay, questions so far? All right, example 3. Is my square by itself? So what do I do? Good, take the square root of both sides. Okay, when I do that, what do I end up with? Good. X squared plus 7 equals plus or minus 5. What will I do now? Very good. Two equations. X squared plus 7 equals 5. And x squared plus 7 equals negative 5. What will we do on this one? Move the 7, because we don't have to have it set equal to 0 because we don't have an x term where we have to factor. So I'm going to subtract 7, and we get x squared equals, and what is 5 minus 7? Negative 2. Then what do I do? Good. Take the square root of both sides. So we get x equals what? Very close. Plus or minus I root 2, because we take the negative out, which becomes I, and anytime I take a square root, it's going to be plus or minus. Okay, so then we move to the other side. What will I do? Good. Subtract 7. When I have two negative numbers, I add and keep the sign, so that makes a negative 12. Next, we will take the square root of both sides, so we get x equals. Very good, that is correct. So a pair of 2's, 3 left over, we take that negative out, so we get 2I root 3, and anytime I take the square root, it is plus or minus. So my answer is x equals plus or minus I root 2 and plus or minus 2I root 3. So how many total answers are there? 4, right? There's 4. Okay. Questions before we move on? All right, 12. Is the square by itself? Yes, so what do I do? Good, square root of both sides. When I do that, I get the square root of 2x plus 1 equals what? Plus or minus 3. What is our next step? Two equations. Root 2x plus 1 equals 3, and root 2x plus 1 equals negative 3. Now what? Okay, so we have root 2x equals 2. And then what would you do? How do you get x by itself? You're dividing by root 2, right? To get the root 2 away from the x? Good, so those cancel, but we can't have a root 2 in the denominator, right? Which is what you guys are telling me. So in order to get rid of that, I have to multiply by a root 2 to both the top and the bottom. Okay, so when I do that, I have a pair of 2's in the denominator, which makes a 2. And then on the top, I have... Good, and then what ends up happening there? The 2's cancel out, and so I just end up with x equals... Well, wait a second. Did you make a root? Like, did you personally take the square root of both sides anywhere on here? No, you didn't here. So this one is not plus or minus. It's only plus or minus when you are physically taking the square root. So on this one, when I physically took the square root of both sides, it was plus or minus. Although there's a square root in this problem, I personally didn't take the square root of both sides where I had a square. Do you guys get what I'm saying? So this one is not plus or minus. It is just x equals root 2. Okay, so now you're going to do the other side. What are we going to do? Very good. We're going to start by subtracting 1 to both sides. So I have root 2x equals negative 4. Next, I will, good, divide by root 2 to both sides, but I can't have a root in the denominator, so next I, very good, multiply by root 2 to both the top and the bottom. We get a pair of 2's. So I have x equals negative 4 root 2 over 2. And then those can, so 2 goes into negative 4. So x equals negative 2 root 2. So those are my two answers. X equals root 2 and negative 2 root 2. Okay, any questions there?